Good morning, Buck and Vidya. I think it's going to be a really intimate KMTF this morning. Thank you both for joining us. I think we got the bad end of the holiday kind of weekend, and you're the only two who are here today. But thank you for being here with us. I'm Yemisi Songo-Williams, the KM specialist for TOPS, and I'll be moderating today's meeting. And I'd also like to introduce you to the other members of the team who are here, and we'll start with you, Adrian.
Yeah, unmuting. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Buck and Vidya, for joining us. I'm Adrian Tadella, KM officer with Yemisi in the TOPS program.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. This is Holly Collins. I'm the communications associate on the TOPS program. And I'm excited to hear your feedback on the infographic today and talk about everything else.
And hi, everyone. I'm Michaela Nesson. I'm an intern with Core Group this summer and helping out with the TOPS program as well.
Thanks, team. And I'd also like to introduce two members who have been so instrumental in developing the resources that we're going to be reviewing today. They really have been unfailing in their commitment to the process and to its outputs, and they'll also be helping to kind of guide the discussions today. So the first one is Emily Janock, and she has contributed to many a KMTF initiative. She's a Deputy Director on KM for the Care USA Food and Nutrition Security Team, and she focuses on ways to better learn from and share implementation experiences on eradicating poverty through the empowerment of women and girls. We also have Emily Holmes with us, and she has been serving at Samaritan's Purse as an M&E advisor since December 2013. Emily provides all 16 field offices with support in their data analysis, visualization, survey methodologies, grant management, database management, and reporting. So Emily H. and Emily J., it's always a pleasure to work with you both. Thank you for both being here today and for working so very hard on each of these products. And Adrian, I'm wondering, because there's so few of us, if we can give microphone rights to Buck and Vidya, and then just so we can all chat rather than use the chat box, if everyone's comfortable with that. So as you join the meeting, we asked you to answer two questions for us, just to give us an idea of whether people are actively collaborating between KM and M&E, and also to get a feel of what you think are the key issues that drive this collaboration. So I think four of us disagree that these two functions work well together in our organizations and in our programs, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of those experiences. And in terms of the things that we think are important, you know, planning together, having adequate resource allocated, creating an enabling environment so where there are proper systems, etc., being put in place. And we also think that leadership support and champions from each technical sector are important. So I will start today with just a really brief background of why we decided to engage with this work. And then we'll look at the two sort of products, the infographic and the key activity guide, and just try and get your thoughts on you know, what we're missing, what looks good, how we could improve these two. Okay, and then we'll also talk a little bit about how we want to disseminate this information to the community and what possible next steps we could take to follow up with this work. Okay, so am I moving? Yes, I am. So the trigger for this work really came from a joint monitoring and evaluation and KM task force meeting over a year ago. And it really was in response to the needs of both task force members. So a key challenge that people spoke about then was that there seemed to be a lot of confusion about how these two sectors should or could work together for stronger programming. And there was even some confusion about what each of these functions meant, what they actually did. So M&E folks were frustrated that KM was increasingly being added onto their responsibilities, and they didn't really know much about it. So they wanted to know what these new terms meant and what capacity they needed to acquire to be able to be effective in these new tasks or with these new tasks. And the KMers were also looking for a better understanding of monitoring and evaluation and how they could use it in their work. We felt that KM was pretty siloed within programs, and sometimes this had pretty serious consequences when we were trying to evaluate and look at impact. So we spoke about some of the challenges that we face. You know, this issue of working in siloed teams that kind of led to a lack of coordination, a limited results flow, gaps in understanding and knowledge within program staff. We spoke about limited sort of communication and information sharing between the two functions and the effect that this had on the quality of the work that we did. And we also spoke a little bit about the duplication of or redundancy in efforts that occurred when we didn't work together. So each function was developing its own separate set of tools, you know, and there really was no coordination between both groups. Systems weren't compatible, different software, etc. was being used, and all of these things really hampered the collaboration between M&E and KM. And we also wanted to address what we felt were missed opportunities from this lack of collaboration and working together. So for example, we often miss catching implementation issues because we don't have this strong M&E and KM connection. And often there's really insightful learning that comes from M&E activities, but we miss the chance to kind of integrate these back into our project. And so as organizations, we become a little bit sluggish, we become a little bit unresponsive, and we can't really provide accurate and timely information on the impact of the work that we do. So these were all some of the challenges that we spoke about. And both groups really wanted to know how we could work together successfully. We could all see the potential benefits of a kind of highly functional synergy, but we really wanted to know where to start, you know. What did members of the task forces want to explore? And there were many useful suggestions that came out of this discussion, but out of all those ideas, the ones that people really wanted to look at were kind of developing and disseminating this key message that M&E and KM were not competing forces, but collaborating forces. We really wanted to articulate why this proposed synergy between the two would be beneficial, not just to each of the sectors, but also to stronger program implementation and overall program quality. So this is how we got at the idea of coming up with this infographic. And we also wanted to give practitioners some very real guidance on how they could begin to work together to make this collaboration happen. So we came up with a key set of activities that M&E and KM practitioners could implement across various stages of the program cycle, and we chose to use the USAID program cycle for this work, just to drive the collaboration. You know, we wanted people to think about what the concrete, practical things were that they could do at each of those various stages to bring about greater results to our programming. And that's how we ended up with a key activity guidance document. And just a quick note before we get your feedback on these two. Of course, there are various levels of collaboration between KM and M&E. So there's the project level, organizational, country level, regional, etc., etc. And the integration is really going to be very different depending on what level you're talking about. And because of the sheer scope of this work, we just decided that we would start this journey just on the project or the programmatic level and see where that took us. So that was really our thinking behind this effort. And today we'd really like your help with just tightening up these resources and finalizing them. Emily, do you have any sort of additional points that you'd like to make about this? Okay, sounds good. So, can we pull up the infographic? And Emily J and Emily H, I think I'll turn this portion over to you to kind of collect some thoughts on the infographic.
Sorry, it took me a minute to figure out how to get off mute here. It's a little bit different than the interface we usually use. So this really came together from, those of us who are on the phone, and we had some support from Lori Starr and a couple other folks, thinking through really what are the ways that we complement each other? Where are those spaces of convergence where if KM and M&E work well together, it can really move things forward and help the organizations progress. So we talked about sort of from both sides. If you're a KM person, what is it that you think you have to offer, and how you think that the work you do can support monitoring and evaluation? And then the flip side from monitoring and evaluation, what are the things that you think you're contributing to what a KM agenda would look like? So we tried to come to a, sort of the shortest, crispest, most crisp version of what that looks like, and then that all went into this infographic, which I don't know if I can scroll here. Of thinking about really what is it that we have to offer in spaces where we're not competing, but we're actually adding value to the other side.
Emily, you there?
Sorry, yes. So thank you, Emily J. I think that was a really good overview. So we wanted to bring this infographic, and then, like Timothy already introduced, the activities guide to the group to get feedback on the information that we've collected so far, and the phrasing, the overall look, particularly on the actual information presented on the infographic itself, and see if you guys, as experts, were able to contribute any suggestions for edits or additions or whatever other changes to make sure that this is a tool that can be usable for both knowledge management and M&E practitioners. So I guess at this point, if you haven't been able to, I think at the bottom of your screen you should see a way that you can also download these files. If looking at it on the computer screen is a little small maybe, then you can also do that and follow along. So it's broken up into the two sections, knowledge management and how it strengthens M&E, and monitoring and evaluation and how it helps knowledge management. So I don't know if we maybe want to give you guys just a few minutes to go ahead and start skimming over everything, and then open it up for any feedback you may have.
Absolutely, that sounds like a plan, Emily, thanks. So should we take about 5 minutes to just look through this if you haven't sort of had a chance before? And then we'll hear some feedback then.
Okay, guys.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Emily H. Sorry, Emily. I just wanted to make a quick comment on the video's thoughts that it'd be really super helpful to see how these two things overlap during the project cycle and the intent of the infographic. And I think you're right, Vidya. So this infographic we really saw as a kind of marketing piece to kind of help us with advocating for why M&E and KM should work so closely together. And I think the next resource that we'll look at in a few minutes is actually that piece that you're thinking of. So looking at how these two overlap during the various stages of the project cycle. And over to you, Emily H.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm not sure if I make this full screen for me, does that also make it full screen for everyone else? Or is that
try it?
Okay, so it must just be individual because I've already changed it for myself. Okay. So let's start.
Hi, everyone. You can actually...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Emily? Yeah, so if everyone else, you can actually make the infographic full screen individually if you can click on those 4 arrows on the top of that box. So you can follow along with a more zoomed in view. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I know you may not have had the chance to actually really read and in depth think about all of the 10 different points on each of these diagrams. But let's go ahead and start at the top, at the first one, the knowledge management strengthens M&E. And I just wanted to invite any feedback on the individual 10 different bullet points that are arranged on that, or anything that maybe we're missing, or any other clarifying questions on that top infographic. Jillian, just reading your comment. So does KM refer to the team unit, M&E refer to team units, or is it more of individuals? I think that's a really good question. And I think as in general, we were thinking about the roles of KM and M&E, not necessarily trying to spread that out amongst either a team or an individual. I know at least from my experience, depending on the size of the project or the size of even our country office, that may vary, where we may have specific individuals charged with these tasks. We may have one individual charged with both tasks, or we may have a unit for each of them, and then for them to be able to work together. Emily J., do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think that's exactly right. The only piece I would add is, in some ways, it's about the discipline, right? It's about, because some people are KM and M&E, and it's the same person. So it's sort of about which hat do you have on, and how are you thinking about a particular problem. But in the cases where you are lucky enough to have a full M&E unit and the full KM unit that are separate things, then you would be thinking about that.
Yeah. And is there anything that stands out for anyone looking at this? Maybe something that you completely disagree with or you're totally in agreement with? Does it just makes complete sense to you? I think for me, one of the key sort of benefits of this that I see, at least at the top tier of the infographic, where KM strengthens M&E, is the information in the box numbered 8, so those kind of better connections. KM working to translate the information and to build those learning networks. I hope there are no M&Eers who are going to be offended by this, but I think sometimes the focus on M&E is so very much in kind of the rigorous collection and quant data that making those connections and sharing that learning often gets missed.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the group chat box again. Yes, definitions. And that was something that we, as a team or as a task force, kind of did talk about at the beginning. But you're right, we did not include that in the basic resources that we've developed for this. So that would be a good thing maybe that we could add at some point with one of our resource lists to make sure that everyone understands exactly what we're talking about with both knowledge management and monitoring and evaluation and the scope of each of those different tasks.
And I think that's a great point, because that was, in that initial meeting last November, a couple of Novembers ago, that was one of the key sticking points for a lot of people. KM was new to them, and they didn't really know what it meant. So we did discuss then that sort of classic definition of being about the people, processes, and working with those to kind of get people the information and the knowledge that they needed to be effective in their positions. But I think it's a great point. We should add that into this for those who might not be as familiar.
Okay, so I'm looking at Julie. In the lower half of the infographic, a lot of the M&E actions are things you would consider knowledge management. Yeah, so, and maybe having those definitions may help with the way that we're viewing both the KM tasks and the M&E tasks. Is there any particular example you want to talk through? Oh, sorry. Does it help if I kept reading, huh? You actually had one. For example, M&E can share challenges, M&E can share key tools, M&E can provide opportunities. Yeah. So you're right. A lot of these are KM tasks that's showing how M&E contributes. So going back to that circle in the middle, it's M&E helping knowledge management achieve their tasks, where the top is knowledge management strengthening the M&E tasks.
Could you all hear me now? This is Julie McCarty.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
You can. Oh, great. Yeah, and so much of this is kind of like nitty-gritty and semantics and such. It's hard for me to envision. So I see the ones where the monitoring and evaluation team helps knowledge management understand our impacts and create indicators and things like that. That's where what I would see more so at USAID and be extremely helpful. I wouldn't see the M&E team as much helping the knowledge management team share, I'm kind of looking or trying to look at the tiny text. Let's see. Share challenges and strategies or provide opportunities for collaboration, because that's not as much their role. I see that kind of helping us do what we do. So it's partly just kind of thinking it all through, and that's why I kind of asked about whether this refers to the to teams versus the field or the discipline itself. It might be good to clarify that somehow in the infographic, because it's easier for me to concretely think about how would an M&E specialist help a knowledge management specialist, than how writ large does M&E help KM. And just kind of talking out loud, but I think overall it's a really great infographic. I'm just looking through the people.
It makes perfect sense. If there's some confusion at this level, when we disseminate it, there's going to be different takes on it. So that's very helpful, Julie. Just to give a little bit of additional background on that first point, so support an expanding sector. M&E can share challenges and winning strategies. Now, how we looked at it was M&E had these same constraints when they started their journey onto being a technically accepted field, right? It was new, people didn't quite understand it, and they have had years to kind of come up with strategies to embed themselves into the programmatic process. So, for example, now many programs have 5 to 10% of their funding allocated just to M&E. So we thought that we could learn from them how they developed and used these strategies to becoming a more sort of acceptable or integrated function.
Oh, see, that's very interesting.
Right.
Just expanding that story a little bit, I completely see where you were getting. I didn't instantly get that from reading the blurb, but I totally get that now. How they could share their experience to help KM, which is also now trying to gain acceptance and expand. Yeah.
So it sounds like we definitely need to work on that wording. That's great. Thank you. And I think that's a really great point as well, Albana. So Emily contributing to learning while KM takes it and stores that learning. And I think there are instances as well where KM does contribute to learning. So things like, holding after-action reviews after an event or after an initiative to see what works, what doesn't. I know USAID is very much focused on learning agendas at the minute. And I think all those things kind of contribute to learning from programs as well. And Buck, they don't know enough about M&E. The M&E people don't really care or are too busy to do KM functions. I think that's spot on. Yes, and we're hoping that these tools will really help to clarify what the different functions bring to the programmatic table as well.
Yeah, I think what I was just trying to express is that if we have people that are serving, I don't think we've actually had a project yet where there's been someone who serves in expressly a knowledge management function, but at least in title, but some of the maybe the collaboration and cross-silo work that might be encouraged by that person, they really just end up focusing on comms and creating like a nice newsletter or something like that, as opposed to all of the different pieces around the circle. Not that all of them have to be present, but I think it's just been hard for us to have a well-developed knowledge management section, again, because the people end up focusing primarily on communications, and then the M&E people always just seem too busy and don't really consider it part of their skill set to engage on the knowledge management level. So as far as on how knowledge management strengthens M&E, number 2, we have a large grant in Ethiopia, and we actually are semi-outsourcing with the support of IFPRI to lead some of our research and learning aspects. So given their prior experience working with the government safety nets and the research they're doing around that, they're able to then help us think through what the different gaps are in their knowledge that can be built into our research and learning in our project. So we're starting to do it a little bit, but to the extent that we have to outsource it in order to make it happen. Yeah.
Do you think then there's value in this book, as kind of as Julie says, a starting piece for discussion about this, about building KM capacity within your work.
I'm sorry, could you repeat
and
that?
Integrating the two a little. I'm so sorry. I said, do you see value in this resource, in this infographic, as a starting point for those discussions, for advocating to build KM capacity above the level of just communication?
I do. I think it's numbers 3, 4, 5, 6. I feel like are a little murky because it feels so much more M&E focused than it is about knowledge management. I certainly see 7, 8, 9, 10, and 1 and 2 being functions of knowledge management that I'd love to see us do more in our programming. But again, you get into the issue of if you bring on someone to do knowledge management, which ends up kind of like analytic thinkers with the ability to put together well thought through presentations of information that gear towards different audiences. But what you find again is that if you bring someone on to do that, we've just found it difficult to find someone who has that understanding of M&E, so they're not really able to speak into that part of monitoring and evaluation so much as they are taking results and kind of bringing people together to think through them to get you know, how they can integrate better or something like that. So I don't know. I feel like for me, 3 through 6 on the top half of the infographic are. I would need to see a little bit more there to better understand how it can fit in.
Okay. Okay.
That's kind of general, but it's about all I can do.
No. Okay. And I'm just quickly reading through Albana's comments as well. I think it's something I find that came helpful. In the event KM stores indicators, I find it helpful. Great. Okay. So KM provides you with the information that you need. I find the value also if as any. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Julie, I might suggest adjusting the color so that the two, right. Okay. Okay, and that might make the different sectors stand out a bit more. Thank you, Julie. That's helpful. Are there any more comments before we move on to the guidance document? Albana's typing. We'll just give her a minute. Absolutely, Albana. Everything we've spoken about today we'll put on our website and we'll send the link out to everyone so you can revisit these conversations. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to Emily J to take us through the key activities guidance document.
So if people want to take a minute, the same way we did for the infographic we just looked at, so this is exactly what Vidya had asked for, which is thinking across the project cycle, where are spaces where we would collaborate? So this is less about saying this is an M&E task and this is a KM task and the way they complement each other, but saying these are spaces where KM and M&E should come together. With the understanding, as people have brought up already, that particularly KM is not really very clearly defined. And there's a huge variation across organizations about what that role looks like, what the capacity is in that space, how it's resourced, etc. I think that is also true with M&E, but to a lesser extent. But sort of points of convergence and where we would want to see these groups getting together to think about that. So why don't we just take a minute or two to read through this, and I'll just stop talking, and then I'll come back in a couple minutes after you've had a chance to take a look. So I see a couple comments from Vidya, and I see that some other folks are typing. So please go ahead and keep typing your thoughts, but as we get started. So one of the things that Vidya said is that she thinks this is useful breaking it down by the project cycle, but it might be helpful to have it be more visual. So, this just as a chart, it might be useful to have this be more of a graphic representation. And that we might want to think about how do this and the other piece fit together. Is there a way to kind of combine that? Buck, I see that you have a question about, is there a relationship across the rows? And the answer, as I recall it, although Emily or Yemisi, please correct me, no, I don't think so. I think that these were just sort of lists of activities, and it was focused on the column. The rows don't connect particularly. We didn't have a particular
But yeah, absolutely right, Emily. No. So maybe that's something that we could think about.
Okay, so then switching the rows and the columns might be a little more useful for people to make it seem less like there's a relationship there. That's certainly something we can do. And Albana, I see that you suggested more space for collaboration in the performance monitoring piece, which I think is great and interesting. Could you give us some examples of what other pieces you would want to put in there? I see that you're typing, so I will give you a minute. So for this one, it seems like the consensus is around the idea of organizing by the program cycle is good, but the format is not as helpful as it could be. In terms of the actual content, the pieces in the different boxes, are there things either that jump out that you disagree with or you didn't understand, or things that you say, oh yeah, that makes total sense, and make sure that that stays into whatever the new format looks like?
And as we think through that bug, it would be really interesting to hear some of your thoughts about what the column headings could be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't have anything off the top of my head, but
Which is totally
you know,
fine.
even if there are I don't know, like collaboration, like different knowledge management themes that these pieces could fit into at different parts. So the themes then would be the column header, and then the row header would be the life of the project life cycle. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So to try to, right now we don't have an organization structure across the columns.
So for example, you know, you could have like, even under performance monitoring, the way it's set up right now is that you're creating products. Well, you know, that's kind of a theme, and then developing action plans might be considered a product, or the action steps, both of the things under evaluation might be considered a product. Then you might have collaboration as the theme, or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. One that, just as you were talking, that sort of springs to mind to me as I look at performance management, products is one piece, but there's also things about adaptation. Are you actually learning something and changing your own behavior based on it? Not just are you writing project briefs. So that might be another one there about adaptation more as a through theme than as a specific moment in the project cycle. And then I see Albana has also typed in here that she sees more space for collaboration in evaluation in that column. So thinking about designing evaluations and the process of managing the evaluations are two that might go into that evaluation column there. Yeah, and then Albana said thinking about learning and adapting as part of performance monitoring. So that sounds like that I just reformulated the comment she had already typed in there. So if we kept it as a matrix kind of piece, even if it's more graphically sort of appealing, it seems like there's kind of a call here for you know, keeping the performance cycle as one axis, and then thinking about having some more consistent themes on the other axis, and that learning or adaptation should be part of that other axis, not an end point in the project cycle the way it looks right now.
Okay.
Are there any specific pieces of content in the boxes right now that you would either add or subtract? Big holes that we missed, or things that you think, no, that really doesn't make sense? So I also see Obana having typed here that performance monitoring might be another one that's more of a through theme than it is a points in the program cycle, that it's something that happens all throughout implementation. So if that were true, and I know this is one of those questions that we'll never get everyone in the world to agree on, what do you think of as the key points in the program cycle? Program design, what we have right now, if we took out learning and adapting and performance monitoring and made those more through themes, we have program design, program implementation, and evaluation. Does that seem like the right set of things for the program cycle, or is there something else we should add?
That's a great question, though, Emily. I mean, having worked on this, I'm struggling to think of what else would really be. There we go. Bug, design, startup, and evaluate, closeout.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and closeout is where, you know, closeout kind of forks. There's the piece where it's just, here's everything that closes down, and then here's the learning that feeds back into the new program design, right? So that's where that, so it, pieces of it are an endpoint and pieces of it feed back into the next cycle. Oh, so Albana's suggestion is that we think about project management categories, because that's sort of a standard agreed set of disciplines. So that might be an interesting way to think about, you know, looking up the standard project management, how they define a program cycle. Although frankly, that might be exactly what Buck did already. I'm not completely up on the way project management literature defines a project. And then Vidya talked about planning and design sometimes are a little bit different, and that particularly design, especially, I am adding this, Vidya did not type it, but especially as we do USAID implementation and proposals, right, that often doesn't involve a lot of KM collaboration because it's just so fast to get that proposal out. So that, you know, the planning phase, if you can do that before proposal writing, and get KM involved ahead of time, that might make the proposal writing a little bit easier, and the design piece that happens there.
That's a really great point, Vidya.
And Julie, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like you're agreeing with Albana's point that maybe what we do is pull ourselves sort of one step out of here's how USAID defines a project and think more about that project management literature. So one thing that we talked a lot about as a group when we were developing both of these infographics is spaces where sort of KM and M&E converge. And in my own experience, one thing I see is both disciplines or teams or people, however it is you think about the way this is structured in your organization, one of the overarching concerns is to make sure that the data and the learning is getting fed back into management, and that it's actually changing things. So it doesn't become this process of you develop indicators and evaluations, or you develop lots of short briefers, and that becomes the end point, is just developing those products, right? And the products are supposed to be a vehicle to get things to change. They're not supposed to be an end point in themselves. And sort of what the exact products look like differ based on those, you know, sort of where your discipline is. But thinking about how could we work together during the project cycle to make that happen, is how do you get sort of project management or project implementers involved? Because that's one of the things I think we have as a common goal. and is what we're talking about here doing that or not?
Mm-hmm. So I feel like the second point on the learning and adapting might touch on some of this, but it doesn't go far enough now that I'm listening to you, Emily. So we're discovering what hasn't worked, what has worked, and we're learning through failure, but I think we missed that piece of actually using what we've learned back in our programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's something in one of these about making recommendations or, you know, talking with project management, project implementation, or regular reflection meetings. I'm not sure where that would go exactly. But I say this being one of the people who's commented on several drafts already.
Comment away.
Sorry.
No. Oh, Emily, the first one under program design already alludes to that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, I think we did a reasonable job of getting that into the program design piece. But at least from a knowledge management standpoint, as we think about it, program design is really important to get as good as we can, but we know it's never going to be perfect. And so we would want the space to continue to make changes as we go.
Yeah. Actually, could it be the first point under implementation? Make sure new learning is documented, shared, and implemented.
Yeah.
Okay. But it sounds like it's definitely something we need to tease out a bit more.
So are there any other sort of thoughts or concerns about this one? Certainly, you know, we all agree that there needs to be kind of a rework on the layout and the format it's presented in. And then, but it sounds like the content is mostly, people are pretty comfortable with that. Albana, you had a couple of places where you said you thought we could add some more content. So if you want to type those into the chat box, we'll make sure that sort of specific recommendations about what would go in some of those boxes. We'll take a look at that and incorporate that into the next draft. And then I think we're ready. I'll pass it back over to Yemisi to move on to the next piece.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily J. and Emily H. And thank you all so much. It's really been useful hearing your feedback. The Emilys and I have spent about 8 months working on this. And so it's really nice to have a fresh pair of eyes just go through it and, you know, help us make it better. So an immediate action point for us is to go back and consolidate all this feedback and update both documents accordingly. So thank you very much for your input today. We also wanted to touch on very quickly how we wanted to disseminate this, you know, how we can share this work with others in the community. So at TOPS, we are going to be sharing this out once it's completed via the task forces, both the KM and the M&E listserv. We will probably start an online discussion to invite final comments on the updates, and we're also going to share it in our next newsletter. Do any of you have any kind of networks, access to networks or channels that we can also use to kind of socialize this across your organization, you know, any individual or professional blogs, anything that we can really use to help share this information out there? AgriLinks just popped into my mind, actually. Julie, do you think this could be a venue for that? Stan, yes. Thanks, Emily. We'll reach out and ask him. He'll probably have some feedback for us as well on the documents. KM for Dev, Adrian's just suggested. At the World Bank, that's right. And one of our members works on the Secure Nutrition platform, so we can ask him too. The question, Julie, was whether we could share out the updated resources across AgriLinks. Vidya, no, it hasn't yet. They were involved in the initial kind of discussions, and Emily has been really, really helpful in bringing that M&E perspective as well, but we will plan to share this with them as well before finalizing. Thank you, Emily. Absolutely. Would love to take you up on that. Yes, Julie, the updated resources from this process. Great. Thank you, Julie. Learning Lab, yes. These are really great suggestions. Thanks, everyone. Okay, and, you know, as you go about, if you think of any more, please just send us an email. And we'll include those in the dissemination list as well. And then just finally, before we close, are there any thoughts on where next we could go with this work? You know, we spoke about this collaboration looking different at various levels. Should we then attempt to outline what this would be at an organizational or regional level? Or maybe even try and develop a strategy for how KM and M&E could work together? Would we want to take it to that point?
One that I would think about is hosting another meeting between the KM and M&E task force. I found that to be really interesting and thought-provoking when we did it. I think it was towards the end of 2015. So it might be a good chance once these materials are finalized to sort of touch back it in and
fantastic. That's a great point, Emily. Thank you. I see Julie typing. And then also just a couple of quick updates for you. So we have our knowledge sharing meeting on the 19th and 20th of July, and that's going to be another opportunity for us to get feedback on these documents. So we'll let you know via the listserv how that went. Also check out the latest Knowledge Management Task Force newsletter on the website. It features Joan Whalen, who is the Strategy and Learning Advisor at USAID, and Stacy Young, who's the Senior Learning Advisor at USAID. And the reason that I mention this is because they both speak about creating an enabling environment for CLA. And I think this collaboration between M&E and KM is very much a critical part of that enabling environment. So do check that out. And, you know, I think that's it from us. Thank you so much for your really candid observations and your suggestions on these resources. We are going to immediately start on updating those. Many thanks as always to Emily J. and Emily H. We are really grateful not only for the insights that you've given with this work, but also for the almost year-long commitment you made to seeing it through. So thank you so much. And as usual, the meeting notes, the copy of the recording, and anything else we've spoken about today will be posted on the FSN network soon, and we'll send you an email as soon as those are ready. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye, and see you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.